So one of my best friends and I, his name is Ben. He and I go way back. I'm going to be 31 pretty soon. He's a couple years older than me, and we started emailing almost every day without fail about 12 years ago. Ben and I would talk about life and work and family and friends, passions. We'd send links back and forth of just stupid pictures that you just send to friends. And this is just something that became part of my daily life. It was just kind of this routine. I didn't have an older brother. I'm the oldest of four, and Ben was one of those people who I kind of think everyone has someone like this in their life, but at one point he kind of, to me, I wouldn't call it an older brother, but he kind of seemed like someone I looked up to. Everything he wore was a little cooler than what I had. His music taste was just a little out of reach what have I discovered yet, and I always just kind of admired that. I thought, like, where is he finding this stuff? Like, the internet didn't exist yet, really. It wasn't a thing in 2001, 2002 when I knew Ben. It wasn't what we know it to be now. And so I was always just thinking, like, how does he know about this stuff? Like, he's got a style, like, I don't understand, and there's something about that that's so interesting to me. And so he just meant a lot to me. He was someone in my life who was important. It was at this time in high school that I started taking a very keen interest in art and design. It was always a really important part of my life already, but in high school I really started just kind of doing it, and it was all I wanted to do. I dropped basically every class I could in high school and just whittled it down to art classes, art classes, art classes. That was it. I went to a high school that really supported the arts at the time. Unfortunately, right now they don't anymore, but I was very fortunate at the time to have a high school that really did kind of foster people who cared about art and design and music and things like that. This was a big deal for me because I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life next. I never really had college pushed on me. My parents, to them, it was kind of like, yeah, you can go or not, whatever. My teachers, I think, they just assumed I would go because that's what you do. You go to college after high school. I was more just kind of whatever about it. I didn't really think much of it. Until I found out Ben wasn't going to go to college. That's the first time I really thought, well, maybe I don't have to go to college. If Ben's not going, why do I have to go? And this really was a big deal in my life. I mean, this was the kind of a turning point for me where somebody impacted me enough and tipped the scales just enough to have me make a decision kind of based off something that they had done. It was at that time where I decided, all right, I'm going to take a year off. From what? I don't know. I guess not going to school because I don't know. Like, I don't know what this year off is, but I'm going to just kind of work and sort of see what happens. And it was really that year that sort of everything changed in my life. Ben and I have a really simple saying that we kind of came up with over the years. And him and I worked together a lot and did a lot of projects together and just really had a good rapport. And eventually, we would talk about things that other people did that would go really well or projects that we would do and what happened, the failures, the successes, and everything in between. And eventually, there was this really simple saying that he and I had, and it's almost stupid, and it's kind of what I themed this whole talk around. It's almost just overly simplistic, but it's kind of the principle that I've built my entire career on, and that is this. If you do something, something will happen. That's it. It's not going to blow your mind, but I always think about this. If you do something, something will happen. It's a longer sentence of saying that cause and effect is a thing that exists. That's really all this is. But it really stuck in my head. Him and I have always been people who just did things that just came naturally to us. We just did them to just kind of see what happened. So when I was around 18 and I decided not to go to college, my parents were very supportive of this. My teachers were a little more like, what are you doing with your life? Like, this doesn't make any sense. To me, I just figured, well, I'll figure it out. I'll save some money, and then I'll go to Columbia, or I'll go to SAIC or something down the road. But right now, it's not the right time for me. This is when some really interesting things started to happen. Around this time, I just kind of started compiling some of my personal projects I had done in high school, putting them on a portfolio together on the internet. I came up with a domain name the way that you might come up with a band name, which was write down a bunch of stuff and pick the one that looks the coolest. That was NoPattern, so that's kind of what became a company. I didn't really anticipate it being a company at the time, but that's what it was. And so I just started thinking, all right, maybe I'm going to just have this little art thing on the side, and that was it. I had this pastime that I loved to do, and that was go to bookstores, and I would read magazines. And I would just sit there on Friday nights, Saturday nights. I used to work at Borders, for anybody who remembers Borders. And rest in peace, I miss that place. And I would just sit there with stacks of magazines, and I would follow a very simple formula, because I started realizing all these magazines have art in them, and design and illustrations that were done by people who don't work at the magazine. There's a little credit at the bottom that says illustration by so-and-so. And I started thinking, like, how is this happening? Where's this connection happening from? Like, how do I get to be one of those people? Surely magazines don't ask for resumes, right? Like, there's no way they vet every single person that does like a little drawing for them or anything. So what I did, and this is still to this day, and I've been speaking for a lot of years now, and this still 12 years later is my very favorite story to tell, and it's the stupidest, but it's the simplest for me, is that I would go to the bookstore, and I would have this stack of magazines. I'd go to the masthead, which is where they have all the credits for who did the magazine. And essentially, I would go look for an email address next to someone's name. And in 2004, there's not really an email address. This is before the internet had really become something you could connect with people on. So what I would do is I would take a notebook and I would write down the names of these people. So if it was TED Magazine and John Smith was the art director or the editor and whoever was listed, I'd write that down, and I would have pages and pages of these names and then the name of the magazine next to it, or the name of the magazine's website. And I would go home and I would just start guessing email addresses. And it was kind of spammy, but I was 18 and I didn't really care about that. I literally had nothing to lose at this point in my life at all. So I would go home with this notebook, and I would sit down in front of my computer in my parents' basement in my bedroom with a really cool aqua carpet, and I would just start doing, let's say we have tedmagazine.com, and the guy's name is John Smith. That's the formula. All right, well, John.Smith, introduction, subject, hey, I'm Chuck, here's my work, check me out, send, J_Smith, send the same email, J.S, Smith_John. And I had a text file, literally just in like notes or whatever, a text edit program that was just every first name, last name combination you could think of. Initial, first name, sometimes it was just their first name, sometimes it was just the last name, sometimes it was the last name period and then the first name, which when I realized that one, it opened, I was like, just blew my mind, like, oh my gosh, like that's crazy. And I started thinking about this thing that Ben and I would say, if you do something, something will happen. And I just started sending these emails out. Introduction was the subject. Again, nothing to lose. Send an email out, see what happened. And I would send these emails out, and I would go to bed, 3 in the morning after doing this, and I'd wake up at 11, whenever it was, with my not much of a job situation, living at home at the time, and I'd wake up, and it was like Christmas morning, because there in my inbox is introduction, like 30 of them. And what I got most of the time was, thanks, appreciate it, we'll be in touch. Thanks, cool work, nothing for you right now. Sometimes it was an auto response, sometimes it was, whatever. And I just kind of kept doing this, figuring eventually maybe this will catch, like maybe eventually, and if not, who cares? So one morning I wake up, and sure enough is a response from the art director at ESPN magazine, which was the hardest of all the email addresses to guess, because the emails were at espn3.com, which took finding some bizarre legal document on the internet that had these listings of email addresses. And he wrote back and literally said, I don't know how you found me, but we have a college football feature coming up, and your work would be perfect for it if you're interested. And I was like, all right, man, yeah, cool. And I played it cool like a professional. I said, absolutely, let's do this. Tell me what we need to do. He said, let's get on a call. Called me. And I know that's not tasteful to talk money, but just for the sake of naivete and kind of being candid with you at the age of 18, he on the phone is telling me about the project. I'm like, cool, this is great. Yeah, I totally understand what I'm doing. Totally know what an invoice is. Don't know what an invoice is. And he's like, so are we good if the budget's $3? And I was like, $300, like, I'm good, awesome. And he's like, so we good, 3,000? And I was like, oh yeah, like we're great. Yeah, and I got off the phone and literally go straight upstairs and tell my mom in like 10 minutes of like hugging and like, oh, I'm rich, like, oh my God. And this is really where my first taste of community as someone who sits kind of alone in a bedroom without much else to do was kind of experienced as an adult. And I know that's kind of weird, and it's kind of this sort of bubble version of community, but I had made this connection with my friend Ben early on, and him and I would talk all the time, this whole if you do something, something will happen. I had made this connection with this guy who suddenly hired me and paid me enough money to help me rent and move out of my parents' house eventually, which was such a big deal to me at the time. That suddenly made my bank account go from 3 figures to 4 figures, like to give you some perspective on this. And it just left such an impression on me, and I thought, wow, like there's people out there that I can reach out to, and they might hire me, and I might get to know them, and we might kind of talk about creativity and art and design and make some sort of connection. Every successful person I've ever known has put themselves in a position to succeed on some level by trying something. The opposite of this is that if you do nothing, nothing will happen. And I'm not really here to tell you guys or tell anybody, to take the world's biggest risk and make that huge leap and do something insane and see what happens. For me, it was just the send an email out and see what happens. And it was literally the spark that started my entire career 12 years ago. If you do something, something will happen. Fast forward 2 years ago, I was at an event here in Chicago, and I met a guy named Jason Peterson. We didn't have much chance to talk, but I met him, and I thought he was a great photographer, didn't know much about him. Went home, and I thought I was kind of disappointed that I didn't get more time with this guy. I'd love to chat with him. I'd just shoot him an email and say, what's up? Let's meet for coffee sometime. And he wrote me back a couple days later, very short email, yeah, how's coffee? Tuesday, 1 o'clock in this place. All right, great. So we go and we chat, and by the end of the talk, I'm sitting there thinking, like, am I going to be getting like a job or something? I don't understand what just happened. Like, we just had this really kind of bizarre conversation where he took more of a keen interest in me than I'd been anticipating. A few months later, he reaches out about doing some freelance work. I did some freelance work. He actually turned out to be the chief creative officer at an agency here in Chicago called Havas. And I didn't know that when I went to meet with him. I wasn't looking for anything. I just literally wanted to connect with him. I had just moved back to Chicago from being in Michigan for a few years, and I just was trying to meet interesting people. He hired me for some freelance work, and then a couple weeks later, I get a call, hey, are you interested in something full-time? And I was like, I don't know, maybe? What are we talking about here? And he explained this position to me, and now here I'm a year and a half later, and I'm the design director at this agency, and I have this more full-time normal job than my freelance career before that, but I can trace this all back to that email and just kind of a desire to meet this guy. Again, like just kind of in a nutshell, a very sort of simple bubble version of community that to me was so important. Making this little connection over an email turned out to be so powerful, and it was kind of that lesson I learned when I was younger and just sent this email out, caution to the wind, just like, hey, who cares, let's see what happens. I just think that there's something amazing about making little connections with people like that, and you kind of can't be afraid. I've had people ask me before, when you sent those emails out, weren't you afraid? Like, weren't you kind of worried what they were going to think of you? And I was like, well, I'm just sitting in my parents' bedroom or in basement, my bedroom. Like, how much worse could it get? Like, it's not, like, I don't really have anything to be afraid of here. I just throw myself out there and just see what happens, cast a wide net. And if you don't catch anything, I mean, it is what it is, but let's just try it. So now that I'm working at this place and I'm around all these people, I've gone from this life of community that involved emails and my cat sitting around in my office. That was kind of the extent of my community for about 11 years. And my cat was pretty cool. She was like 20 pounds, so it felt like a person kind of, or 2 cats maybe. But it kind of was like a community, me and her, like it's good times. So now I'm working at this place, and there's people all around me all the time, and it's a totally different level of community because I'm in a position to mentor younger designers, but I'm in a position to be mentored myself and kind of be pretty humbled in a lot of situations where I have to just kind of realize, like, I don't know everything. I have to learn from these people around me who have been doing this forever. And that's been a challenge for sure, but it's just this type of community that's been so good for me to experience. And I think when I've talked to other people who have gone from that sort of freelance career or solo career into working around other people, or even vice versa, I think it's so incredibly important to kind of get a little taste of both. Recently, actually just last night, one of the guys that works over at Havas and in our new office that we just opened called the Annex, just staffed with a lot of very young people who are just kind of doing their own photography or doing art and design, and they've been kind of hiring people who maybe don't fit the bill on paper but are really creative, and they're going to kind of see what they can do. And there's this guy named Dennis there. Dennis is 21 years old, and Dennis loves photography, and he really wanted to do a gallery show. He'd never done a gallery show before. He's 21, like, who has? And so Dennis decided, I'm going to do a gallery show, and I'm going to get 4 of my photographer friends who are kind of these up-and-coming photographers in Chicago, and we're just going to do this for fun, and we're going to tell people on our Instagrams to check this out, and that's it. If you do something, something will happen, right? I don't think he was thinking about that line, but it's the case. He just wanted to do it. And he did it, and the event was actually last night, and the turnout was incredible, and just watching his family who had come out to see him, and his sister looking at him like, what have you gotten yourself into? Like, why are there a couple hundred people here to see your stupid photos? Like, what's going on? And they were just kind of lit up with that, and just kind of glowing in that opportunity that he had created for himself. I don't know what's going to come of that opportunity for him, but he tweeted last night, "Thanks everybody for coming out. I've never felt more love and support in my life." And that was pretty powerful for me to see this 21-year-old kid get that feeling because of this little thing that he had done, and then send some invites out, and then all these people come and support his work. It really kind of blew me away. And you know, as I've gotten older, maybe a little more jaded here and there, it's really refreshing for me to see, you know, our youth today, and Chicago right now is just an incredible place in terms of creativity and young people just doing things that will gain traction like you can't even imagine, and just doing it on their own. It really just kind of reminded me of when I was that age and what I would do. And again, as I've gotten older and started being a little more jaded about it, seeing someone like him, it just gave me such a fresh wave of inspiration. And all I can really do is hope to pass on the lesson that I did myself without realizing that I was even doing it, and then later on kind of did it more consciously, and then saw someone else do, which was just simply, if you do something, something will happen. It might not be what you want. The result might be different than you expected. Nothing might happen at all, and you'll maybe learn from the way that you did it. But regardless, if you do something, something will happen, I promise. You might learn something from it. You might get exactly what you want, but just do something. Just do anything, but just do something, and that's all. Thank you.